The Juneau World Affairs Council and the University of Alaska Southeast, in collaboration with KTOO, present the 2023 World Affairs Forum, Immigration, Detention, and Power, Addressing Bias and Prejudice. In this lecture, Migration, Power, and Bias, a Local Response to a Global Reality, immigration attorney Heidi Cerneka speaks about the global reality of power and immigration through a grounding in the reality on the ground in El Paso, Texas.
Thank you. I want to repeat the words of Professor Binford and Professor Arocha, and just saying thanks for the invitation, for coming together, for all of us to think together and learn together and debate together. I was asked to explain, so I have two logos. I work with Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center in El Paso, doing direct advocacy for migrants at the border. I'm also part of an organization called Maryknoll Lay Missioners. It's a Catholic mission organization, although you don't have to be Catholic, that sends people overseas for 3 years to work in some kind of service. We're teachers, engineers, lawyers, advocates, pretty much whatever you bring into it. I'm a slow learner, so I've been with Maryknoll 25 years. But anyway, that's who I am. Okay. I think I hit the wrong button.
Turn the opposite button.
It has a red light on it.
Oh.
Score. Okay. I want to start with this challenge to us, and then I'll explain a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. The truth is that the mass deportation of non-white people and immigration bans based on nationality, religion, or race are quintessentially American. Although the anti-immigrant language and the violence at the border today may make some Americans uncomfortable, this is exactly how the United States has treated non-white immigrants throughout its history. It is who we are. The question is it who we want to be in the future? And I'm going to come back to that at the end, because I think that's our invitation. That's our challenge today. I'm right at that perfect age where I need my glasses to read, but not to see you all. So I'm going to look like a grandma. I'm going to talk about this reality at the global level, at the national level, and at the US-Mexico border level. I'm going to make this personal. Bear with me. I truly believe we all want safety, security, healthcare, clean air, a future for our kids, but all has to mean all. And it can't mean a limited few. So this is a call to action. We're all here. So, this is the perfect example of preaching to the converted. But so I want to start just with some basic information also about displacement at the global level and remind us this is not a US border issue. We're not going to fix this global question by building walls, right? So what is forced displacement? We've talked about this, and you would think that we sat down and kind of planned our talks together because they've overlapped really nicely. Think of forced displacement as a measure of last resort for people that are facing an intolerable situation in their country of origin or their city of origin and can no longer cope with the reality of where they are. They can no longer survive it, or their ecosystems can no longer sustain them. That's the forced part, and they have to leave. So just some stats and numbers to give us a sense of the immensity and why this is not a US border issue. That 108.4 million people is now 110 million people forcibly displaced globally. That's the United Nations High Commission on Refugees statistic. 3% of the global population is outside their country of origin. Now, some of that's not forcible, some of that's voluntary or choosing. I've lived out of my country of origin a lot. 11,000 people are displaced per day. 11,000 people. That's like the population of Juneau every 3 days, right? And that's going to triple in the next 5 years. 2/3 of the world's displaced are not protected by refugee regimes because our understanding of asylum is very limited. And so if there's a climate displacement, if it's economic, if they don't follow the Cartagena declaration that Professor Rocha was talking about, they don't qualify for asylum. And yet we're talking about people, right? We're talking about people with names, people with stories. They're not invaders, they're not threats. These are all people that I've worked with or represented, and every one of them has a name. Eva, Janilson, Zan, Elizabeth, Mario. And I think I love hearing, like, of course I'm right at the Texas-Mexico border. And so I love hearing about you in Alaska that I would say is like way far away. Hosting people from Ukraine and building those relationships, because that's what makes the difference, right? It's us. So Filippo Grande is the High Commissioner for the UN High Commission on Refugees. And I think he's very prophetic. He's very direct. And so he says things like, this is a political issue. This is not a humanitarian issue. It's not an immigration issue. This is not about immigration, really. This is about power and economics. Wait, now I need my glasses because he has a couple other good quotes. He says, we have 110 million people that have fled their homes because of conflict, persecution, discrimination, and violence, often mixed with other factors, including climate change. And he said it's quite an indictment on the state of our world to have to report that. Okay, he had another issue I erased. This is also very historical. If you think like way back in the times of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, there was asylum. They had an obligation to offer hospitality, and they did, in part because you didn't want to offend the gods at that point. But this is a reality that's been going on for thousands of years. All right. Actually, I'm going to go, well, let's leave this. So I'm going to bring it to the national level. Let's think about United States history, right? The first Europeans that arrived, the colonialists that came, I'm going to go out on a limb, they probably weren't bad men, right? They did some things that we're still suffering and reaping the repercussions today. They were men of their time, men of their culture, probably weren't bad men, but they assumed a superiority. They assumed they had the right to take the land they wanted. The early missionaries that came to the United States assumed a religious superiority, assumed they had the truth. Most of us aren't bad people, but that doesn't mean we don't make big mistakes, right? And it doesn't mean we don't make mistakes that are very damaging. There's a movie I saw, and I won't go into the whole story because it'll eat up all my time, but if you've ever seen it, called Rabbit Proof Fence. It's from like 1990. And it has to do with Australia and a response in Australia at that time to children born of Aboriginal women and non-Aboriginal men. And they were removed from the home. And it shows the scene where they're in a school and these women are teaching these children, like civilizing these children, right? And the children are saying, I have a home. And I just remember being struck by that, thinking those women, it's a true story, thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing a good thing, thought they were like saving these children. And what are people going to look at 10, 20, 50 years from now at things we are doing, things we've done, and be like, what were they thinking, I think the chance we have today to avoid that is that we can learn to listen to each other. We can learn to challenge each other. We can learn to be humble enough to be called out so that I can learn now instead of 50 years from now. But that's our challenge, in my opinion. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about bias, prejudice, migration. And again, I'll start at the global level. I'm going to go forward one. Okay. That guy in the middle is John Siambo. He's actually a Maryknoll priest. He's born in Kenya, decided to become a priest, joined an order out of the United States, went to Peru, went to Guatemala, fell in love with Latin America. And he's like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in Latin America. Guess what? John the African, with the whole institution of a Catholic Church behind him, couldn't get a visa to stay in Guatemala. John couldn't get a visa to stay in Peru because he's African. So, we here need to look at our own society and indict our own country. It's global, right? And the change that we need to make happen is global. A friend of mine from Brazil married a man from the Netherlands, and she moved to the Netherlands with him. And in order for her to become a resident and a citizen, she had to take classes on culture to become an appropriate Dutch person. And what she said is, really, it was about teaching the Muslim people how to be cultured. You know, and you can read about the whole fear of the Islamization of Europe. And I don't remember what she said they were, but the classes were ridiculous things. Almost, I'm exaggerating, but almost like, how do you set your table? You know, and not that I'm letting us off the hook. I'm just saying, the United States. Sometimes we actually get in that race to the worst, right? And we're like, we're the worst country. Well, actually, there's probably competition for that. A friend of mine was at the border of Poland and Ukraine when the war started, and she said they were not allowing black Ukrainian citizens to cross the border into Poland. There was like a separate line from the white Ukrainian citizens. And Brazil, who also prides itself on being a welcoming country, has documented Congolese asylum seekers and Syrio-Lebanese asylum seekers. The Congolese are always interrogated, always questioned, always doubted as credible because they're from Africa, because they're black. And the Syrio-Lebanese are welcomed into the country. So this is about bias. This is about prejudice. This is not about justice. And again, it's not about immigration, right? It's about politics, economics. The playing field is not level, you know. So even if I try to get into an argument with someone and they talk about, in some survival of the fittest world, well, the fittest didn't start on the same playing field, right? The playing field is not level for what is the appropriate, correct, just way to migrate, to live. The right not to migrate? What about that? So hang on. There's a book called Undesirable Immigrants, written by a man named Andrew Rosenberg, and he says, colonialism and white supremacy catalyzed violence and sabotaged institutions around the world, exactly the United Fruit question, the NAFTA question in Mexico, right? And this historical legacy has produced migrants and then deemed them unfit to enter the countries that have actually produced them. Again, I know I'm being repetitious, but for me it's because it's about power and it's about politics. It's not really about people. Migrants are forced to take dangerous ways to get here, and I think that was where the other picture. So I don't know how many of you have heard people talk about the Darien Gap. It's this 60 miles of jungle between Colombia and Panama that people have to cross to get when they're coming to the United States or coming to Mexico to ask for asylum. And people die. People are victims of serious crime there by gangs and criminal organizations that know that. They're walking 4 days in the desert. I spent time talking with people, and one of them was like, they told us it was 2 days. So we started giving our food away to people that were hungry on the second day, and then we ran out of food. They're walking through mud to get here. In part because, as Dr. Orocha said, we bullied Mexico into giving people requiring visas so they can't fly into Mexico. So the only way to get here is by land. So our policies not only exclude people and deny them the right to ask for asylum, but we make them take riskier means of getting here. Like that. Hang on. I have way too many thoughts in my head, so I have to take notes so I don't lose you guys or run out of time. I'll run out of time anyway. But for me, this is about fear, it's about power, it's about convenience and comfort. And if you think, even those of us fighting for justice need to be aware and need to be listening, right? I'm all about justice, and I like to say I was born with an extra "it's not fair" gene in my DNA. But I still don't want to pay a lot of money for my jeans, right? So I still want to be able to go to some discount store, which means that my jeans are probably produced in some exploitative manner. I still want tomatoes in January when it's not really seasonal. I still want, and not that makes me a bad person, and I guess that's what I want to keep saying. Like, it's not that people are bad people, but if we're not aware, we make decisions that have consequences. And that's why we talk about implicit bias, right? That's unconscious, often, actions. We're still responsible, right? So how do we change our lifestyles so that we're closer? She says, as she came on 3 airplanes from Texas to get here to talk to you, right? The carbon footprint of that. But how do we change our lifestyles to try to be closer to how we need to be as far as justice questions? What am I saying? I'm saying that countries like ours that has power, resources, have exploited countries in the global south, often for human and natural resources, often for batteries, because I think I need a new cell phone every other year. And then when people flee those countries because they're not survivable, we then don't want to let them in unless we need them to harvest my tomatoes, right? In May 2018, Ana Suda and Martha Hernandez were shopping at a convenience store in Montana when the US Border Patrol stopped them because they were speaking Spanish. In March, Customs and Border Protection detained 9-year-old Julia Isabel Amparo Medina, a US citizen, for more than 30 hours. In July, Francisco Irvin Galicia, a Dallas-born teenager, was held in ICE custody for more than 3 weeks. The thing they all had in common is they were assumed to be unauthorized because they were Latino or because they were speaking Spanish. The Supreme Court has held that Mexican appearance can be used by Border Patrol to make immigration stops, which has just contributed to racial profiling. And yet, because immigration is a civil offense, or it's civil law, they can hold a kid for 3 weeks. He doesn't have a right to an attorney. So how can we say you can stop me for how I look, but I don't have a right for somebody to defend me against your classifying me by how I look? The definition of structural racism is a system that treats people differently solely according to their race, which is what we're doing. you were talking about COVID policies, right? And one of the guys in the house that I live in El Paso, is from Mexico. And so when the border closed, he happened to be in Mexico for the weekend. He couldn't come back. He couldn't come back for a year and a half. So I felt bad, and I was like, we should go over and have lunch with him in Juarez. He's like stuck in Mexico. We should go have lunch. So once a month, we all piled into the car and crossed the border and had lunch with him and came back. And I was like, really, does COVID know nationality? You know? If he had a work permit, I mean, like if he had a green card, he could have come. Does COVID know immigration status? Like, how does that work? And I'm pretty sure statistically, per capita, we had more COVID than Mexico did at the time. And on top of it, somebody finally said to him, you know, you should just fly back. So he literally was at Juarez. I can walk to the border from my house. He literally went to visit his family in Guadalajara, and then he got on a plane and flew from Guadalajara to Atlanta, to Dallas, to El Paso. And he came in. Because clearly COVID also knows economic class, right, and financial status. I mean, it's just exactly what you were saying, what Dr. Orocho was saying about it was never about public health. Never. So US policy and bias. 1% of the people trying to immigrate to the United States actually succeed legally going through a legal process. I can guarantee they're not Haitians, right? So why would somebody spend the time and the money to try to do that if they're fleeing war or economic despair or persecution? Why would you do that? Where do we lose the spirit that both the previous presenters talked about? Where do we lose the soul of our country, right? I don't think it's unrecoverable. I don't want to be like that, doom and gloom. I don't think most politicians are intentionally and consciously looking to make racist policies. I think that's what's happening. Or exclusionary policies. I think this is about numbers. It's about how am I going to get reelected. I don't really think it's about migrants. The newest asylum law that we're referring to as the asylum ban at the border right now, that has all these rules that make it pretty much almost impossible to ask for asylum despite people's having the right to ask for asylum. I read it. I read the proposed law. It was like 100-something pages, light weekend reading. All it talked about was numbers. This will reduce the numbers of migrants coming. This will create a success story where less migrants will come. Honest to God, I think if I did a control search, I'm not sure the word protection was in there anywhere. And we've committed legally and I think morally to protection, right? To protecting people. I won't repeat all the things that our former president said to like label people that were unwelcome. But again, I don't think it's just about him or his party or any party. This is about us as a nation allowing that to happen, you know? And sure, there were like, we know them, right? We're here. So we know tons of people that were fighting family separation. We know tons of people that spoke out against Title 42. But it still took us that long to overcome it. I think today it's also become a game of how do you wordsmith for legal arguments in court, right? It's not about the migrant. It's about how can I write a policy that those lawyers won't be able to overturn in court. When it really should be, how am I going to write a policy that guarantees people that are fleeing persecution or just wanted their kids to grow up somewhere where they weren't threatened by the gangs, could actually have access to that. because the title of this was also detention and immigration, I just want to talk a little bit about immigration detention. So for my first 3 years in El Paso, I worked in asylum for people that were in immigration detention. And I watched my clients, things like, oh, you can't be released from detention because you're too young, you're a flight risk. Oh, you can't be released from detention because you lived here so long that you'll know where to hide. And you can't be released from detention because you've never been here before, so you have no ties to this country. I think we've gotten really good at thinking about what we want and then justifying the pathway to get there. We spend, I don't even know the numbers. Maybe I have them. In 2018, so the numbers are old, we spent over $3.1 billion on immigration detention for people who 99% have never committed a crime in their lives. So when my clients complain about being in immigration jail and somebody says, no, it's not jail, it's civil detention, and my client says, well, if I have to ask permission to go to the bathroom and ask permission to go to the library and ask permission to go out in the courtyard, I'm in jail. And we have privatized facilities because the government has contracted this out. We have privatized facilities. Like I saw the letter from one of them that said, you contracted with us and guaranteed that we would be 75% full, and we're not. So we're going to break this contract. And of course I was like, thank God, hooray. And the government managed to get them back up to 75%. And is that really about security? I had clients who have never committed a crime in immigration detention being shackled, and sometimes they had a GPS locator on their wrist. They had to get through like, I don't know how many locked doors if they wanted to get outside. What was the point of having a GPS locator on their wrist? I always assumed, I never found this, but I always assumed it was because we had contracted to use X number of GPS locators and we weren't using them all. So we were like, let's just put them on people in detention. Because they're not people, because we've somehow deemed them less worthy, right? We've deemed them less worthy, and so we can take their children away. Or we can block them at the border and subject them to being at risk of being kidnapped. The office, OIG? What is OIG? Inspector General. Thank you. The Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security recommended twice closing one of the privatized detention centers, and it's still open. And again, I just want to say, like, this is just examples to say there's no way we can say that this is not about bias, right? There's a lot of discretion in the hands of immigration judges. There's a lot of discretion in the hands of Border Patrol, which just makes the situation ripe for bias. And so, actually, these are all the positive things of what we're doing to make a change. But before I go positive, let me just tell you about some of, this may be a disaster. Okay. One of our clients, there aren't pictures of all these people, but one of our clients who was from Ghana had to prove, it's assumed that all African migrants have false documents. So it's assumed that they have to come up with a way to prove that that birth certificate they're supplying or the national ID they're supplying is legit, because it's assumed that all Africans lie. I had a client from Iran who was fleeing religious persecution, and he was literally asked in his hearing in court if he was a terrorist by the government attorney, even though he was fleeing religious persecution. Mike was held in detention despite serious mental health issues. Mike Hussein from Lebanon. And like to the point of him being hospitalized for mental health issues, they wouldn't release him because of where he was from. He finally got transferred to a different state and a different health facility of ICE, and they released him his first day there. And they said, I don't know why they flew him all the way here just so that we could release him. Yusuf, from a West African country, was shackled as he was moved around the detention center. And I, like, when I talked to him, it just like destroyed him. You know, he was like, they shackled me. Like, I came here to ask for protection and was treated like a criminal. And he wasn't found credible when he, and because he had an attorney, we actually managed to revert that and get him into asylum proceedings and overturn the credible question. But 60% of migrants, I think, in detention don't have attorneys. How are they supposed to be able to fight the system? Haitians that went to court to defend their claim for asylum, their claim for fear of returning to their country, granted a lot of their fear is related to gang violence, which is either a very difficult, if not impossible, asylum claim. But I watched Haitians in court that were not my clients. I was waiting for my client. And I watched the judge, like, literally like this, like, I am so bored, roll his eyes and be like, yes, everybody is afraid, you know? And I wanted to, like, scoop them all up and be like, I'll represent you all. But I couldn't. A client of mine from Colombia came here 10 years in a row on a tourist visa to visit her boyfriend, then her fiance, who lived here. And the last time she came, they wanted to go over to Juarez for the afternoon, because remember, we live right at the border. They asked if they could do that, if that would be a problem. No, that wouldn't be a problem. So they go to Juarez, and on the way back, she gets ambushed because Border Patrol officers also have a lot of power and a lot of discretion. She gets ambushed and told, there's no way a woman like you from Colombia could live here without working. You are definitely working here on your tourist visa. And she was like, no, I'm visiting. Like, I have businesses in Colombia. By the time she got out of there, she had signed a paper saying that she was working, and she was deported for 5 years. Because clearly, it's not possible for a Colombian woman to be independent enough to be able to work from a distance. And lastly, the thing right now, so many people are being held in Mexico. Like, they come to the border to ask for asylum, and right now, at least, of course, they have to use that, oh, I have it over there, the smartphone app as their way of getting in line to ask for asylum, right? So they're waiting in Mexico. It's Candyland for people that want to exploit and commit crimes against migrants, right? It's like ripe picking for all these vulnerable people to be kidnapped and extorted. And so they come up to the border and they say, please, like, I don't have an appointment yet, let me in, because I was kidnapped. And literally the officers will, like, again, roll their eyes and be like, yeah, everybody's kidnapped. Like, because we've normalized that, and because somehow they're less worthy, right? They're less worthy. I wouldn't want that on my sibling, but you're a migrant. All right, so what are we doing? Now I'm going to go forward, so I have time for questions. There was a former CBP agent, Jen Budd, who speaks a lot about immigration and about her experience as CBP, and she says, at the academy, they teach us to use racist terms so that we can other migrants, so that we can separate ourselves and be able to treat people as lesser, to be able to treat people as not worthy, right? And the heartbreaking thing is that lots of CBP agents and government agents are Mexican American in our community, you know? And it's horrific in families. I work with activists who have siblings who work for CBP, and they're just, it's kind of like politics in this country right now, right? There's things you can't talk about at home. Okay, so what are we doing at the local level? Got the computer to work. So Las Americas is this amazing place to work. Wait, I'll have a picture of our team. This is, I probably can't say it from, that's part of our team though, but it's this amazing community-based organization. Most of the people I work with are from El Paso. So very aware of the importance of trauma-informed, client-directed work, right? It's extremely important that the work I do My clients are the ones making the decision in the end. We do advocacy. At one point, I can't even remember which policy it was, but we were involved in one of the cases to try to overturn some of the policies that had been put in place in the last administration. And I was so proud because the short title of the case was Las Americas v. Trump. And I was like, can we please make bumper stickers? So we get engaged in policy discussions. We try to do education. We listen to the community. We listen to what our clients are saying. We build relationships. Like, I follow up. I have clients that I helped years ago that once in a while text me on WhatsApp, you know. I don't have the same boundaries that some people have, but I do have boundaries. But they text me on WhatsApp because I give them my number. And because it matters that we have a relationship as people, right? Not as lawyer and client, as people. And they tell me how they're doing and they ask how I'm doing. And that's how we break out of this world that we've created where we other people and make them commodities that we use to get elected, right? Or that we use to buy cheaper jeans. El Paso's an amazing community. We call it the tri-state community because it's Texas, New Mexico, and Chihuahua, Mexico. And lots of the people that I work with lots of the people in our community have family on both sides of the border, right? So it's part of who we are. I think that's the human response. I think we spiral up because people treat people with respect, and then you want to treat other people with respect because you were treated with respect. I'm going to run out of time. But this is some of El Paso, right? So this was after the massacre at the Walmart, right? I love that flag. The color's bad, but like that's green for Mexico on the left side of it. Or this totally refers to what Dr. Bimfer was saying the other day of the light, right? Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And despite the enormous numbers of people that are coming across the border into El Paso, people are at soup kitchens, people are taking care of their neighbors. This friend of mine had a guy wandering the street in front of her house, and she finally went out and talked to him, and he had some mental illness concerns, and he had a piece of paper with his name and his phone number. And so she called the phone number, and his brother said, "Oh my God, we've been looking for him for a day. Give me your address and we'll come pick him up." So she gave him her address, and then his brother said, "Wait, you're in El Paso? We live in Juarez. He lives in Juarez. How did he get there?" And my friend was like, "I have no idea," but you know what she did? She said, "Give me your address." She put the guy in her car and she drove him over to Juarez. So what are the not solutions? I'm running out of time. It's not more policing, not more enforcement, not higher walls. I don't know if you can see carefully that wall. You can see me at the very bottom. That's how big I am. Again, when you look at the mud from the picture of the Darien or this wall, what makes a person go over that wall trying to get to safety? Not a sense of adventure, right? We have a legal obligation. Deterrence doesn't work. We know that, right? And so that the old saying, if you always do what you always did, you're always going to get what you always got. Why do we keep trying to do deterrence in a different way? It doesn't work. So the former High Commissioner said, we need to reframe this, right? And instead of repeating harmful narratives of fear and exclusion, it's time to welcome people into our communities, to reimagine our collective future. We need to be regional about how we do this, global, right? We're not going to fix 110 million people out of their country of origin by looking at walls. We need to do a whole of society response, which means not they, the government, we, the society. And then how do we do it locally? Let's look at the language we use. Let's reframe how we make references. Let's uphold the dignity of people who, by accident of birth, happen to have been born somewhere else. let's expand our sources of information. I love to say, let's go broader than MSNBC and Fox News, right? We're here, so we're doing that. But let's encourage other people to do that. Enter into real dialogue. How often have we been in dialogues where it's like, are you done? Okay, let me tell you why you're wrong, right? Let's actually get in dialogue and listen. Let's question ourselves and make a space for other people to have the courage to question us. Because we all make mistakes. So think globally, act locally. My last two quotes: the US Department of State publishes a human rights report every year. Kind of ironic, but we do. So this was what was written by the Secretary of State. We are a nation founded on the belief that every person is endowed with inalienable rights. Promoting and defending these rights is central to who we are as a country. We could be that country. I don't think we are right now, but we could be that country. And so finally, I go back to where I started. The question is who we want to be in the future. And my favorite postcard: when you have more than you need, build a larger table, not a higher wall. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
I have a simple one. What was CVP? CVP.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Customs and Border Protection. Because CVP is actually the Crime Victims Program where I work, and I was like, did I say that? Customs and Border Protection. You know how we all have 1,000 acronyms for everything today.
Thank you. It's my turn?
It sure is.
I'm a systems engineer. I like to look at the big picture. Is there something in common between our climate change problem and our human treatment of each other problem? That means that one cannot be solved without the other. If we were to concentrate on the climate change problem, maybe we would ameliorate the way we treat each other. Because in order to deal with the climate change problem, we really have to look at the whole global system, not just of humans. This is a very anthropocentric conversation we're having here. We're talking about just one species and how some of us treat the other species. But if we learn that we need to treat all species with respect and inclusion, as in we must for the climate change problem, maybe that would help us treat each other as humans in our singular species a little better. And is there something in common here with the religion that seems to be prevalent in the country, which is based a lot on Calvinism, I think. Remember, whereby some of these people are just chosen by God to fail. There's nothing we can do about that. Predestination. So why are we interfering with God's work and will here with these people that are obviously predestined to fail? Shall we overcome that at the same time as we work on climate change and how we treat each other? That's all.
That's all.
That's
I had to take notes because you already exceeded my capacity to remember your question.
That's just systems engineering for you.
No, I think your first question, and I'm sure I would definitely open that up to other people to respond beyond my response, but with climate, two things I can think of immediately. One, I think especially in European and North American cultures, we've gotten to a place where we're used to being in control. Some of us, those of us who have power, are used to being in control. And all the climate things happening remind us we're not in control, which makes us even more nervous and more controlling. So maybe if we resolve some of those climate issues, first of all, we'd have to stop being in control. So that would force us to do that. But secondly, maybe that would relax us a little bit about how we respond. But I think the other piece is that people are fleeing their homes. The internally displacement is often because of climate. But what happens is you're a subsistence farmer in Kenya, right? And then there's this drought, you can't subsist anymore. So you have to leave your farm and you go to Nairobi. You're internally displaced. Well, then in Nairobi, maybe you're persecuted because of gangs, maybe you're persecuted because of sexual orientation, your religion, something, and you flee your country. We look at that in the immigration system as somebody who's fleeing Nairobi, when truthfully, that displacement was environmental, right? But we've already kind of interrupted that. And so then we would realize that we have a lot more people who are displaced because of environmental and climate issues. So if we could resolve or start to repair some of our climate issues, people wouldn't have to leave home. Because remember, it's not just the right, people have a right to migrate. It's also the right not to migrate, right? And I think I was reminded this week with something I read, it's not just what can we do to make a difference, it's what do we need to stop doing that might make a difference. So let me stop there. I won't ignore your other question about religion, but let me just say if other people have responses to that question, and I appreciate you reminding me, as I said, we need to be open to being called out. And I know you weren't calling me out, but I appreciate being reminded that there's a lot more than one species on this planet. Is that about climate?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
Sort of a question. It might be better off in the panel, but to that point, like you're saying, one of the examples I think of sometimes is in Uzbekistan, they used to utilize a lot of child labor for cotton farming processing, right? But at the same time doing so really polluted, I think, a local water source or lake that was pretty big in the region, in the area. And so through, I think, like the ILO, the UN, in partnerships with the EU on economic pressure to get them to change to better standards, to not utilize child labor, force them to have cleaner cotton processing and all of that. In a way, then I'm sure help reduce migration causes because they, not the use or ending the use of child labor. But in that sense, it was a very Western maybe approach or pressure, right? Is that still the right way? Are those the kind of solutions we should be tackling in the first place, is trying to distill these, I think, what we're used to, Western economic, and political economic theories and solutions onto developing countries where we might see these migrant crises come out from. So it's kind of, that's an example of it happening, but then also a question, is that the right way to do it?
I might need help on that one too, but I do think you reminded me too that there's also that reverse question of if we, when we are more attentive to environmental issues and clean processing issues, that may force us to be more attentive to human rights and human care issues. Or think about if we're more attentive to environmental issues, maybe we would stop mining, we would stop having foreign countries go into Guatemala to mine, and then people wouldn't be forced off their land because some people can manipulate the legal system and show up with title to the land. So I don't think that I'm really answering your question, but it did make me think about that. Like I've had clients who have had to flee Guatemala because their land was taken from them. Well, I'm in Alaska, right? That's happened a lot. Again, if somebody else has a response, this is a collective thinking process.
Sorry, just to add a little bit to that, because now I'm thinking another area. So for example, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, right, we're trying to mine cobalt more so we can fuel the production of solar panels to fight climate change. But then slave labor, child labor is taking place there in order to mine that cobalt. So there's this kind of maybe vicious cycle as we try to fight and address climate change at the same time. So anyway, sorry. I don't think,
no, you're right. I don't think it has to be a vicious cycle if we didn't have to be all about profit, right? If we'd be willing to pay more for our solar panels or pay more for clean cotton, or if the person that owns whatever, the car company, the solar panel company. Remember when all the car companies went on strike? And, well, no. Sorry, it was the crash, I think, in 2008, and then all the owners flew on their separate private jets to DC to negotiate loans because they were going to go bankrupt. Like if we can, I know. All right, so I am a little utopian, right? But stop who needs that much money, right? If this doesn't have to be about profit at that level, we could have solar panels, and we could have fair and healthy mining practices or cotton processing practices. It doesn't have to be an either or, except when you come down to, and I think, and I can say this because I'm a lawyer, if it doesn't come down to how am I going to manipulate this so I win in the courts, right? All right, I don't have a lot of time. Your religion question, that might be a good one for the panel. So we can all chime in on that one, I think. But I would definitely have, talking about anthropocentric worlds, I would definitely have questions about who decided that that idea of predestination came from God. Like the people that benefited from it, right? The people that wrote that that was the voice of God. So again, it comes back to power. Who makes the rules? The people in power, and then who benefits from them. Like, there was this great thing in Brazil one time where somebody in Congress proposed a bill he knew would never pass that said if you are a public employee, you have to use public health care and public schools. Of course, it didn't pass, because who votes on that? Who votes to give up their private health care and their private schools? The people in Congress, right? So somehow we have to rewrite that. I mean, you, Professor Binford, talked about like how close we are to like losing what little true democracy we have, you know, and so how do we make sure that doesn't happen? How do we be that country that defends people's rights?
That was Heidi Cerneka discussing Migration, Power, and Bias, a local response to a global reality. It was recorded October 14th, 2023 at UAS on the unceded territories of the Occoquan on Tlingit-Ani as part of the 2023 Juneau World Affairs Forum, Immigration, Detention, and Power, Addressing Bias and Prejudice. Produced by KTOO and the Juneau World Affairs Council in partnership with the University of Alaska Southeast, with support from Core Alaska Kensington Mine and Ramada by Wyndham.